Hello, everyone. This is Michael Mathieu, and welcome to my podcast. And today I am very honored to introduce you to one of my new friends. His name is James, and he lives in Bermuda. And he's one of my on Instagram. There is a small group of us who are working our way through a journey of healing from oxalate toxicity related issues. And so James is one of my new friends in the oxalate world, and he's got quite an amazing story to tell. So I'm very excited to have him on my show. And James, thanks so much for being here with me.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. This is a real pleasure. And I do count you as a good friend. And I'm just so inspired by your story. And I'm just so thankful to be able to come and share mine with you and your listeners.
Yeah, thank you. So I thought what we might do to get started is James has quite an intense story, and it's long, and I'm okay with that. But I thought, just as an intro, if James, if you could just give us kind of more the like 1 or 2 minute overview, just so we have kind of a summary going into things.
Sure, absolutely. As Michael mentioned, I was born and raised in the island of Bermuda. I grew up eating sort of the standard American diet. In my university years, I was dating a young lady who at the time was a vegetarian. Just to make things easy, I switched over to a vegetarian diet when I was in university, and that stuck for decades with me. I then, since I met my wife, we decided that we were going to change even further by going to become vegans. And we did that for our health, for the planet. And we had watched a lot of the vegan sort of films surrounding that way of eating, things like Game Changers and Forks Over Knives. And I was a vegan for 6 years. Unfortunately, by the 5th year, my health started to really deteriorate and went off a cliff to the point where I was very ill, bedbound, brain fogged, hair falling out, skin and nails cracking, down into 127 pounds, emaciated, unable to put on weight. And I started to bleed from my bowels.
And how old were you at this point, James?
This was a couple of years ago. So I was 47 when this all started to occur. And it really all hit the fan when COVID hit exactly at about the same time. And I was left virtually bedbound and without insurance, because I ended up losing my job, not because of the illness, but because of COVID. And I had to figure my way out of a very dark and deep hole. I was depressed. I was anxious, very scared, very sick. I did not honestly think I was going to be around much longer unless I found a way. I started to Google online all my symptoms, and lo and behold, I came across our angel, Sally Norton, and a presentation she has online on oxalate toxicity. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I could have been doing this wrong all this time. And it was from there I started to go down the rabbit hole and figure out that it was my diet and the plants that had been causing me to feel this way for so long and feel so badly. So I started a very slow journey up until where I am now, adding animal foods back into my diet and becoming basically a carnivore where I am now, and healed my conditions. And it's an ongoing struggle for me as I deal with the plant toxins, which you're very familiar with, and I'm dumping regularly now because I've lowered them significantly. But I'm so pleased to be able to share my journey, and we can go into further detail about what happened. But sort of that is the snapshot of where I am now. And it's a crazy story. One day I'm going to write a book, Michael.
Yeah, I think I've got one in me too.
Oh, you sure do.
Yeah,
you sure do.
And just throw this in. Speaking of books, my partner Beth, who's been with me we've been together for 13 years, and she was with me when I crashed and broke my neck. She's writing a book about our journey together, especially from her perspective since I crashed. And she's just got it off to an editor just in a couple weeks ago. So
Amazing.
so books are happening. Sally's book is coming out in a few days, and Beth's book maybe sometime in the next year. And yeah, so books are, I think we need more books from people going through some of the journeys we have.
I agree. I agree. And that's amazing. I look forward to getting a copy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Excuse me. So remind me again with what you just shared. Um, how long ago did animal foods start coming in again?
So the pandemic hit in March 2020. I started to add animal foods back in after coming across Sally's presentation and listening to Carnivore Cast and her subsequent interviews. I would say animal food started to come back in by the end of 2020, albeit I was still doing more of a ketogenic style at that point because I was scared to go to, really eliminate all the plants. And I was still eating avocados and rice and grains, but at least I was getting some animal nutrition in there. So, and at the same time, Michael, I was lowering my high oxalate foods, because that's the one thing I really took away is that, okay, maybe if I start to lower these high oxalate foods and swap them out for Sally's recommendations, things like get out the chia seeds, get out the Swiss
Turmeric.
chard, and turmeric, you got it, and start,
Spinach.
and black pepper to white pepper, and then the low ox fruits, and I started to see some real benefit. And then that's where I sort of started to realize, man, I had done this all wrong for so many years.
Yeah. So basically about 2 years since we're at the end of 2022 here. It's been
Yes.
about 2 years you've been low ox and adding more animal foods back in. Yeah.
Correct.
And then
sorry.
how long have you been more carnivore-ish?
That was February this year.
Okay. All right.
Yep. February this year. Yep. And that's I have to tell you, as I'm sure you also agree with, that's when I really started to not notice some real game-changing moments for me, both in my mental clarity, the way I was feeling physically, my fatigue left me, that I had unrelenting fatigue. However, the caveat is to that is as you know, I got really excited and eliminated everything for a few months and reached out to Sally and said, "Oh my gosh, I feel terrible. What's going on?" She says, "Oh, slow down there, cowboy."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Just that helps fill in the timeline. Okay, so let's kind of go back to the beginning and dig in a little bit. One thing I'm curious about, I think a lot of us, as we make these transitions and start figuring out how we got ourselves into trouble, I know for myself, I keep looking back like all the way to the beginning of my life, and just it kind of fills in some of the gaps, some of the things that we've learned recently. And it's like, how much chocolate was I eating when I was 5, and what did we eat on a regular basis? And I'm wondering if you've had those conversations. I know I've heard you interviewed before and you talked about, well, we were on a standard American diet, but I'm curious, like, especially around the world of oxalates, were you eating a high oxalate diet even as a little kid?
That's a great question, Michael. And I've thought about this a lot recently, so it's timely, because the answer is here it is. I was a nut addict. I always remember as a child, whether it was specifically this time of year, Christmas, when the Christmas bowls would be out filled with nuts. Yep. But throughout the year, I was addicted to the honey roasted peanuts. My mom would tell me when I was a kid, all I ever ate growing up was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I would refuse everything else. And I was a nut addict. And I started to think about this the other day. I really ate peanuts, any type of nut I could get a hand on. And it wasn't just a few handfuls. I would eat the whole container in one sitting and put them back. So you're absolutely right. And even beside those things, I would have lots of greens and things like that. But as a kid, certainly I was eating a ton of nuts. So that would explain a lot too. And they're very tough on the digestion for folks who can handle oxalates, let alone those that can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're a good example because they're actually legumes, not actually nuts per se, but but I don't know the numbers, but I would imagine they're quite high in lectins, and they also are probably high in phytates. And they're I don't know if those things, do those things get broken down when you roast them? That's I should know that better, and I don't.
I can't recall. I think that they do to a degree, but not completely. As with anything, there's going to be a little bit left, but I think there is some benefit in doing that. But I mean, certainly I wasn't just eating the peanuts. I would any type of nut I could get my hand on, whether it was cashews, walnuts, anything salted. I craved a lot of salt and salted nuts, and I would just eat the whole container for sure.
Yeah.
It got so bad that people would give me as gifts for my birthday containers of those huge plastic jars of nuts, and I would
so
go through them.
you really went for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't even thought about that till recently, so it was a really good question.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other foods that pop out? Like was your home, were you guys big into like white potatoes or things like that as well? Sweet
Abs-
potato.
Absolutely, especially white potatoes. My grandparents, my grandmother was from the Turks and Caicos Island, but my grandfather was from the UK in England, in Chester. And potatoes were a staple in my grandparents' household, and which became in my household as well, because my mother, I think you may have heard before, my mother was vegetarian for a long
Yep.
time when I was a child, and still continues to be to this day. And despite my telling her to eat animal foods and get a lot of the stuff, high oxalate stuff out of her diet, she's, and we also did eat a lot of chocolate, Michael. I mean, it was in the household. Easter, Christmas, my mom baked a lot with chocolate. So we had a lot of chocolate in my upbringing as well. So when you start to really sit down and think about it, especially us folks, who are 50 plus and, knew no better at the time, we were consuming a whole pile of oxalate foods, really, even though they might have been a small segment of what's out there. But you think about potatoes and how ubiquitous they are, potato chips, chocolate, and all these things we were talking about, peanut butter and nuts, all back in the day. It's amazing that we've had the health that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. And then symptom wise, I'm sure you've taken a deep dive looking at yourself as well. Do you, even like, before you were 10, do you remember, and with looking at it with a different eyeglass now, do you see
Excellent question.
signs?
Excellent question, Michael. I have done. And for those folks that have gotten sick in their later stages of life and have had the good fortune to figure out what is wrong with them, inevitably what you're going to do is do what we've just are doing right here and go back and say, okay, now I know what made me sick. Did I eat let me think about what I ate as a kid. And then the other thing you start to do is, what were the signs? Did I have any signs early on that I was getting sick? And, as a child, I had a lot of attention deficit disorder symptoms. They were testing me for a lot of dyslexia, things like that. And I used to make fun of it and say, I used to be dyslexic, but I'm KO now, which, it really was a challenge for me putting words and sentences together. And I had, very sort of hyperactive, but I really should have started to notice in my vegetarian years, because I kept getting sick, meaning my body wasn't fighting off illnesses like it should. I had recurring bacterial infections. I had something called epididymitis, which for you men out there is a swelling of the testes, very painful. And every time I went to the hospital, because it got so painful, it literally, not to, be too graphic, but it felt like someone was crushing those parts of our body. And we all know how that painful it can be. They would give me these severe antibiotics to take, and I'd be happily mowing those down every single time I went, which, as we now know, was killing off my beneficial gut bacteria, which was then setting me up for even more pain later on, because it was killing off those bacteria that help us break down the oxalates in our diet and basically napalming everything else, right?
Yep. And I'm going to interject something here. I was scrolling through my pictures of my story over the last 3 months, and about a year into being carnivore and low oxalate, therefore, my right testicle swelled up about 6 times bigger than normal. And I 99% sure it was oxalates coming out, but there was that 1% of like, oh my God, even though because of my quadriplegia, they're non-functional. It's like, I still don't want to lose those guys. So it's just, it was like, oh my God, is it going to explode? What's happening? And it was
Yeah.
there for 2 weeks. It's such a common oxalate thing. Something swells up for 2 weeks and then it goes away. And
It's crazy when I think back of the things that I did have that happen to, the swelling, you know, and I constantly, you know, Sally talks about the grit in your eyes that come out, and I, you know, I'm getting it a lot now, but I got a lot in my younger years. I got it all through. I remember in university going, oh my goodness, when I woke up, all the grit and, you know, just problems with my vision. And, you know, especially as I mentioned to you, those vegetarian years, I had incidences where I would pass out and faint. A couple of them where people, I fell down. There's a cut. I don't know if you guys can see here, but there's a
yeah,
scar
yeah,
here. You can see the scar. I came down and I struck my head on a doorknob. It's a wonder how I didn't take my eye completely out. I just missed this doorknob and knocked myself silly because I fainted. But those were recurring things with me. And yeah, as it came closer to the vegan years, you know, I've often said this in interviews, I went vegan for all the right reasons, so we can discuss that if you want to, but it just, for a while there, I did feel better, but then it just got progressively worse and then very bad.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a common story out there. Yeah. So, okay. So continuing forward, so you had some, you know, we're with looking at it a little more under my magnifying glass, you're spelling out some things were showing themselves.
Mhm.
But you also, I know from hearing, you know, getting to know you better, you also are really active physically and got into athletics and various sports. So it didn't totally waste your health then. It was when you dive deeper later. So kind of fill us into that part.
Yeah, so continuing back to sort of the vegetarian years, I was eating a lot of processed foods because it was just easy. Being a vegetarian at that time, you know, there wasn't a lot.
Which is when you're in university, right?
University, and then when I came back and was in the working world here,
Yep.
and you know, the 9 to 5 was busy. I came home and you just wanted something quick and easy, so there was a lot of microwave meals and processed seed oil stuff and high oxalate foods, and then of course a lot of nut breads. A lot of then the nut flours came on the scene, you know, so everything had almond flour, and then the almond milk came out, so I would add that in because I thought, at the time I had dairy allergies and then an allergy to gluten. Meanwhile, it was probably because the oxalates were wrecking my gut and my gut junctions were coming apart, and I was, you know, just registering everything. But yeah, it's I was very active in high school and very active in university, but then I separated my shoulder playing basketball, so that kind of stymied that for a while. But I maintained it. I tried to be as fit as I could. I put on a lot of weight when I came back to Bermuda and got in the working world, simply because I didn't have the time to do the exercising. When I did do that, kind of part of my reason for going into veganism was, you know, I heard it would be a good beneficial for weight loss, because I was a little overweight, admittedly, as a vegetarian, you know, eating all the wrong things, and it did work. And then I was exercising. However, looking back now, I can really see the difference between me exercising now as a carnivore and me exercising back then. The recovery time, the aches and pains I had as a vegan exercising were awful. A big clue that dropped for me is I had an incident when I was vegan of a frozen shoulder. And I don't know if anyone's ever, or if your listeners have had that, but when literally you wake up one morning and you cannot move your shoulder. And I listened to an interview with Sally, and she says that can be a common sign of oxalate toxicity, is that frozen shoulder. And you have to get an injection in there where they give you a steroid to be able to move it again. But these things kept cropping up, even though at the time I thought, oh man, I'm the healthiest guy out there. I'm just eating all the plants.
Plants are keeping me healthy and saving me from disease.
And saving the planet too.
Yeah.
Oh boy, Michael, if I knew then what I knew now. But hey, we have to go through what we went through to be able to share our experience and hopefully let other folks know not to do what we did, right?
Exactly. Yep. That's why both of us we've kind of similar path with our podcast, interviewing people and hearing their stories and getting the word out there. So yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So continuing on with your story. So you were kind of standard American diet for a long time. You were still healthy enough to be able to play sports through high school and into college as well. But it was during college when you started exploring vegetarian diet. And then take us into the next 10 years or so after that.
Yeah. So basically, as I mentioned, I came back to Bermuda in the working world. I got into insurance, which I was in for decades. Ironically, in health insurance. Oh,
Yeah.
it is ironic. Um, and, it was a very demanding job. I still am to this day in insurance. The insurance world is very demanding, albeit I'm doing life insurance now. But back then it was health insurance, very demanding. So I didn't have a lot of time to be sourcing healthy food. So I just was eating a lot. I was consuming a lot of alcohol, drinking a lot because it was a high stress job. And I thought, oh man, I could just use a glass of wine. And plus it was, part of the culture in the industry. We go out on Fridays. And so my health started to deteriorate. As I mentioned, I put on weight. I ended up meeting my wife, who you've met, and she was always a very healthy eater. She's originally from Venezuela, but grew up in Florida her whole life and had always had meat as part of her diet. But as couples do, when you meet the person that you're with and end up marrying, you start to look into things. And she said, well, why don't we look at this veganism thing? Why don't we see what that's all about? Because it would really just start really getting a big push when we started back in 2015 or 14, I want to say. And it was really becoming part of the vernacular. And there are a lot of movies out there and the clips kept popping out. And of course, social media was just burgeoning then. So all the social media stuff talked about the vegan diet and how it could heal you and heal the planet. And we watched a few of the movies. And of course, as it does, it pulls on those emotional heartstrings. And she said to me, hey, do you want to give this a try? And I said, sure, let's do it. And, for the first couple of years, we both felt really good because we felt good mentally because we thought, hey, we're helping the planet. We're helping the animals that are out there suffering and our health is improving. We both felt, sort of like we were losing weight and just all around better. And I think that coming from a highly processed background and then eating a lot of plants, clean eating, that can happen for some folks. My wife ended up really loving the style so much that she got fully qualified as a plant-based chef through a culinary institute. So we ate really well at home. You probably heard me say a lot of the criticisms levied towards me now, talking about, I must have never been doing the vegan diet right, which I absolutely love. And if I could show folks, which I will do eventually, some of the pictures of my wife's creations, they are just unbelievably whole foods, plant-based creations that we ate and thinking we were eating so healthy for ourselves. And as I mentioned to you, it was probably about the fourth or fifth year of veganism when I started to notice things going wrong.
Yeah. And that's a common story too, as
It
you both
is.
out there, that kind of time frame. For some people, it hits really quickly.
Yeah.
But for other people, they can have a run of 3, 4, 5 good years before they start showing signs.
Yep, that's right. And the signs for me were definitely, I started to notice no matter how much I was eating, I was losing weight to the point where, as I mentioned to you earlier, I got down to 127 pounds, which was scary thin as a 6'2" man.
Yeah.
But I was just putting all this stuff in. One of the first things was the brain fog that crept in, the unrelenting brain fog, where my thoughts, I remember sitting at my work, at my job, and I was saying to myself, what was I doing just now? And my wife used to have a little fun with me and say, hey, you're getting old. I just asked you a question. You've already forgot what I've asked you. I'm like, yeah, what did you say? I can't remember. And I just put it off. I'm just getting old. But it got so bad that I really couldn't even start to perform my daily functions at work. And then sort of the really bad physical body aches came in. I remember I had carpal tunnel syndrome down my arms. I started wearing these braces on my arms at work just to be able to type on a keyboard. And then I could hardly walk. I remember saying to myself, why am I so stiff everywhere? I feel like I'm in my 90s. I can't even move. The pain was excruciating. And then my hair started to fall out and my skin was cracking. I remember looking at my nails, they stopped growing, and my nail beds were going back in my nails, and all of my fingers were cracking and bleeding constantly. And then the severe constipation hit, which was one of the worst because it was so painful. I was only about 135 pounds, but I looked like a pregnant man because no matter how much I was putting in, I kept getting sicker and sicker. And Michael, your listeners should understand that I never thought it was the diet. I never thought it could have been the plants that were affecting me.
Can't be the plants.
Can't be the plants. And I researched online, like, what is this happening to me? Why am I doing this? And I found this doctor online who prescribed this healing of autoimmune illnesses through this plant-based smoothie diet where, and I kid you not, it was kale, spinach, chia seeds, kiwi, and pineapple 3 times a day mixed up in a huge blender. And that's what I did.
Isn't there turmeric in there too?
There was.
Can you give the quantities quick? I want to hear the quantities again, ish.
It was a whole bag of spinach, a whole bag of kale. Now you have to remember, my wife was a chef, so she had one of those big
Vitamix or blend.
Vitamix. You got a Vitamix. You got it. So
Yep.
I would go. My grocery store guys would know I was where it was coming in at that time, and then put aside the bags of kale, and then it was. So a bag of spinach, a bag of kale, a cup of chia seeds each time, a cup.
Tablespoons a lot.
Yep, this is a cup. And then 2 kiwis and chopped up half pineapple. And I added the turmeric for good measure because I heard it was anti-inflammatory, mind you.
Yeah,
So
it is.
I had read online about that stuff. And I proceeded to blend that up 3 times a day and power that down. And I thought, hey, because at the time, with everything that I was going through, my GP, my general practitioner, my doctor thought I had autoimmune issues because my thyroid was swelling, my hair was falling out. She was testing me for hypothyroid, Hashimoto's. With the carpal tunnel, she was putting me on all this stuff. She was testing my liver. So I looked for autoimmune stuff, and I did this for a while, and that's when things got really bad.
Yeah.
I kid you not, and sometimes, you've heard me in interviews break down, and it was a very scary space to be in, Michael. It was, as you can relate to, I felt very alone. The pandemic had hit. I had no insurance. I was literally lying in bed going, I don't know if I'm going to live anymore, and I don't know if I want to live anymore, because this is not a way to live. I could not think straight. Every time I went to the bathroom, there was just blood, and I was really nervous that this is it for me. And that's when I found Sally, who came to the rescue. So I'll let you have
before we continue with Sally, I just want to chime in and say, oh my God, I know those scary places.
Yeah.
And even on the flip side of seeing healing in myself, yet my oxalate dumping is so extreme at times. I mean, even as recent as in the middle of the night, last night, I was like, am I really healing, or am I fooling myself? And it's that deep coming back out of this madness for me sometimes. So
absolutely.
So I get those scary places. My life is full of them, unfortunately.
Oh, I knew you could relate. You, my brother, over anyone with what you've been through. I really commend you for everything, Michael. You are such a trooper. And it's just, as I said, it's an honor to be chatting with you, man. So yeah, this is where I was at, and I found Sally. And as you know, I started my journey out of the craziness.
Yeah. Well, so okay, so then tell us about your, tell us about kind of what you started seeing for, the healing process. Both, were there some things that got worse, and then what were the things you started seeing healing? What were the things you started seeing right away? And then what have you seen over this time here over the last couple of years?
Before we jump into that, Michael, I just want to touch on something that you and I had chatted about offline quickly, which I think is pertinent to where this stage in my journey is.
Okay.
And that is the mental side of things for me. I talked a little bit about the physical. The mental side was very, very scary. And I look back now, and I made some posts on it on my page, my Instagram page. I was extremely depressed and extremely anxious with everything. And my wife had to go through all this with me. And I have to say, the person you see here smiling before you today was not the same person 2+ years ago. I was not fun to be around, Michael. I have to tell you. And I tried to control it, but I could not, because having the gut dysfunction, having the constant pain and constant thoughts that were entering my mind, the anxiety, it was not easy. And we often talk about ourselves, but don't forget about the folks that were with us along the way, that were there to support us. And my wife, God bless her, stuck with me and continues to. And you met her earlier. She's a real trooper, and she's seen me go to hell and back, and I put her through hell. So I'm very thankful for her. And I just wanted to mention that. So as we get
and I was sharing with you that I lost a marriage because of my health problems. And at the time, because of my own health issues, I ended up going on a low oxalate diet. And this was back in like 2003. And I didn't know about oxalates. I just thought I was getting worse, but it ended up destroying our marriage.
I'm so sorry to hear. I'm so sorry to hear that. I can tell you, we had some very long and heavy conversations, and I'm just so thankful that she's still with me today. And I'll leave it at that. And I've apologized profusely and thanked her for it. And I think we're into the other side now, which I'll start talking about. But yeah, as our friend Jeannie, the Low-Ox grandma, so eloquently put it the other day in an interview I did with her, when I started lowering my oxalate foods, lowering those things that Sally suggests you swap out, and adding some animal foods back in, it was almost like a dimmer switch on the flame went down, that flame of the oxalate burn, and my brain fog started to lift. And that was one of the first things. And the pain that I had in my wrist started to subside, and I noticed I could walk a little bit easier, and my skin looked a little healthier. And oh my goodness, just to have that happen, I thought, okay, we're on the right track here. We're on the right track. And being the man that I am, a stubborn man sometimes, I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well, because I have to let your listeners know, after I found Sally, I found Dr. Baker and his presentation on Rogan about carnivore. I don't know if that was your journey as well, and we can talk about that. But then I thought, well, hey, these people are healing everything using the carnivore way of eating. So if I just eliminate all these plants and all these fruits at one time, I'm going to be super duper. And again, for a while, I felt really great. I went through some transitional issues, which we learn about in the carnivore way of eating, sort of the keto flu. But about 3 months in, the oxalate dump, my first post carnivore oxalate dump hit, and man, it was a doozy. It was a real doozy. I mean, I thought everything was coming back again. Like you, I was second guessing myself. Like, am I doing this right? God bless Sally. Messaged her on Instagram and said, Sally, I'm feeling terrible. And she's like, hey. From her own experience, she went carnivore herself for a while, or heavily animal based at least. And she had, similar things where she had to add stuff back in. She's like, you've got to add some stuff back in here, because, your tail is a long one, and you're probably going to have a long road of recovery. So please make your life easier on yourself and add some stuff back in. And I chose to add some fruits, which I continue to this day.
Yeah. So that first dump, do you remember some of the specific symptoms?
Yeah, the sort of, I think you and I have talked about this offline, Michael, is that I experienced a lot of sciatica with my oxalate. So the sciatic pain came back, and ironically, I've just been going through another dump this week. And guess what? I kid you not, I can't make this story up if I tried, Michael.
Yeah.
I had the worst sciatic pain for the last 2 or 3 days. You can ask my wife. I've got the salon pause patches over there. I've got the deep heat relief in bed. I can't lie. And then just before I interview, it disappeared, like literally went away,
Wow.
like miraculously. But
Yeah.
yeah, so the sciatic pain, the sort of, I get tinnitus really badly. That was one of the symptoms, the ringing in the ear.
Now
Um,
you're pointing to your left ear. Is it only in the left?
it's only in the left.
Mine too. Interesting.
I tell you, we're brothers from another
Yeah.
mother.
Yeah.
Mine comes on like gangbusters when I'm having a dump. And I always know because that volume gets increased. I get the tartar behind my teeth, increased tartar. I get sort of, mine is fibromyalgia symptoms. And then I get urinary pain for sure. My urine gets cloudy when I'm dumping, and I get the feeling almost like I'm passing the crystals out. I used to get through my bowels that I could tell when I was dumping through my stool, but now it's more urinary stuff coming out, which
Yeah.
is how I know these days. But that first one, man, the pain, it was the body pain that got me. I was like, oh, what is going on here?
Yeah. Just when
Oh,
you're starting to feel good, right?
I couldn't believe it. I had started my carnivorous Instagram to tell all the people about the carnivore way of eating. I was feeling great. I was exercising. I felt like $1,000,000, and then boom, here it came. So now
Yeah.
I know, thanks to Sally and folks like you and our friends in the Low Ox Warrior group, that what to look for and how to help stymie some of the bad effects, right?
I wonder sometimes how many people bail on a carnivore-ish diet because they thought they were, I even heard, this was like 3 years ago. I think it was shortly into my journey, but in enough so I understood oxalates. I heard Dave Asprey getting interviewed, and he's like, "Yeah, I tried carnivore, and those first couple of weeks I felt really good, and then it felt like I got hit by a truck, so I stopped." And now I know he's talking. It's a couple of years later, and he's talking about it. He seems to understand oxalates better, but yeah, it just makes me wonder how many people just jump off the train because it seems like, oh shit, I knew this was going to happen. Carnivore is hurting me now.
This is it. And I agree with you. I think, I've talked to a number of folks who, now that I have my profile on Instagram, have messaged me and said, James, what's going on? I started carnivore and I felt so great for the first couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden now, and the first thing I do, okay, is give me a background on your history of eating. Did you eat a lot of high oxalate foods? Even if you
Yep.
didn't, you can still have them, because unbeknownst to so many folks, as we know, Michael, oxalates are in a lot of the stuff out there we talked about earlier. So I agree with you. I think a lot of people have bailed, unfortunately, and you just have to know how to work your way around the dumping symptoms with keeping a high animal foods diet in there, which I am going to be eating this way for the rest of my life. And just, yeah, as I did, added some fruits back in. And, if you can tolerate dairy with the calcium, it's a good thing, because it kind of binds in your gut through your digestion. So all these little tips and tricks that are going to be in Sally's book, I know, that's make sure you picks up toxic superfoods.
Yep. Yeah. So continuing with your journey, have there been, I know a lot of people will talk about how symptoms they've had previously get exacerbated. So I'm curious about that with you. You spoke to it already some. And then the other thing, have you had symptoms that you've never had before, but kind of make sense in the whole oxalate dumping world?
Yeah, so some of the symptoms I had in the past, definitely, sort of, the eye stuff coming out, a lot of oxalate, through the eyes and coming out, heavy crusting in the mornings. As I mentioned, that sort of that sciatica pain definitely came back.
Yeah.
The the dumping from the past, or my oxalate stuff from the past, as I mentioned, was primarily through my stool, but now it's switched over to, looks like my kidneys are working hard trying to excrete a lot of stuff, which I'm very mindful of. I'm very mindful of that, because the last thing we want to get is a kidney stone. So I make sure I'm always drinking lots of bottled water. I get a lot of electrolytes in, and that's a really good way to do that. The tinnitus or tinnitus, however you want to say it, that was there in the past for sure. It's so much more pronounced now, but it goes away more quickly. Before, it was this low ringing constant that I couldn't get rid of, and it was driving me crazy. And now it comes on. I know when it's heavy, it gets really loud, really loud, really loud, then disappears, which I'm thankful for, because if anyone has ever suffered with that as you do, it is so annoying, isn't it?
That'd be bad.
Yeah. And then I also know, as I mentioned, the pain in my arms and my wrists, I noticed that comes back. And I really try and put those symptoms to the side now by using Epsom salt baths a lot. I rely on those. When I know that I'm dumping and the pain comes back, the sciatic and the muscle pain, I jump in an Epsom salt bath before I try and go to sleep. Yeah, those are the type of things that I've noticed. Anything new things, occasionally some weird rashes will pop up that I haven't ever had before.
Yeah.
On my skin, usually on my chest or around the groin area, I'll get a rash, but it'll come and go pretty quickly. Yeah, those type of things for sure.
Yep. Okay. Have you had, besides sciatic, any other joint muscle pains? Like, is neck a thing?
I'm
Yeah.
glad you asked. I'm
And
glad you
you
asked.
injured your left shoulder way back in the day. How
Mhm.
has that been talking to you too?
Ironically, my left shoulder, the one that I separated here, has never troubled me on the oxalate diet
No.
since. It's been my right one.
Okay.
Sally often talks about, and again, God bless her, she did an interview where she talked about that knot in your shoulder blade as a symptom that never goes away. And I can tell you, since I was on the vegetarian diet, Michael, I'm in high school and in university, I had this knot in my shoulder blade. I would get it acupunctured. I would get deep tissue massage. I would do everything. But this whole right side of my neck, to the point where I had to go get CAT scans on it because they thought that maybe I had a misalignment in my vertebrae, was so tight. I kept getting it worked on, but it would never go. It's only now, since I've started going low oxalate, that I've found the relief where I don't have pain in either shoulders. However, I know when I'm dumping, because that sucker gets really, really tight again under that right shoulder blade. Did you ever heard of that before, that right shoulder blade? Or any shoulder blade knot?
Yeah. I've heard people complain about it before, but that was pre-oxalate. So
Yeah.
I don't think I have, except Sally. I heard her talk the
Yeah.
piece you're talking about.
Yeah. So it put another, another aha moment. There it is for me, for sure. But yeah, those are the type of things that I've noticed that are coming back with dumping and that have been problematic in the past. It's really interesting to think about, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So do you have anything else you want to finish up with your story? Maybe just give us kind of like where you're at right now and what you're looking forward to.
Yeah. So right now, I'm feeling great, feeling better than I have in years. Even the first start of those vegan days where I thought I was feeling really good, I really wasn't, compared to how I am now. The dumping is going to be an issue for me, but that's okay. I know how to handle it now. And again, thanks to Sally and Monique Attinger and all those folks out in the oxalate space, low ox coach, that are helping us, and yourself, Michael, and your series with Sally. Unbelievable. I encourage all the listeners who haven't seen it to go check out Michael's series with Sally on oxalates. Go to his YouTube channel. I'm looking forward to helping others like you're helping, and just becoming a carnivore coach through Dr. Baker's program, sort of on the last stages of that right now, and just to continue to interview folks on my Instagram page and let them share their stories. I'm just about to start my sort of second part of my first season, and Sally's coming on in January, so I'm very excited about that. We'll talk about her book and talk about all things oxalate, so it's going to be a real honor to host her. I'm a little nervous, to be honest. This will be our first long form chat with her since I got really sick, and I'm going to get a real chance to thank her in person, which is great. Yeah, I don't plan on changing anything from here on out, my diet wise. I'm going to stick to, as I mentioned to you, having a couple of fruits besides all my animal foods on a daily basis. I really feel great. I'm going to continue with the carnivore way of eating besides the fruits and the dairy that I'm incorporating now. and just try and go from strength to strength, and let others know that, you know, wherever you are on your journey, there is hope. You can heal. Just, you know, reach out, listen to, go to Michael's YouTube channel and his Instagram page, reach out to any one of us if you're concerned about oxalate toxicity and want some pointers in the right direction. And last but not least, make sure you pick up Sally's book, which will be available on January the 3rd, Toxic Superfoods. Yeah.
Hey. Well, actually, you're kind of wrapping it up there for me, but I do have one or two more questions I want
Oh
to ask.
yeah, please.
So with everything you've been through, when you put on your big wide glasses and looking at the whole world of nutrition, I'm just wondering what kind of things are running around in your brain these days, you know, with all of your personal history.
Yeah, that's a big one, Michael, but a really excellent question. I would simply say to folks, you know, I'm not sure if you follow her on Instagram, Courtney Luna, who's gotten a lot of publicity on the carnivore way of eating, and good for her. She's really getting that out in the space. But Courtney has a saying that she uses, that, you know, eat meat and question everything. And I fully believe that, because if I hadn't questioned about the vegan diet, if Sally herself hadn't questioned about what she was eating to try and heal herself, where would we be? It's folks that question and ask pertinent questions are surrounding a lot of the dogma that's been pervasive in our dietary guidelines, both from a cholesterol standpoint, to eating plants standpoint, to sugar standpoint. Just question everything. And what I've learned the most is you really have to experiment with yourself and find out what works for you, because as Dr. Saladino often says, hey, if you're feeling great, don't do anything. Don't change a thing. If you're feeling fantastic, you're living your life to the fullest, don't change a thing. However, if you're like most of the folks out there that feel that they could, you know, improve upon something in their life, whether it's mental or physical, make sure you just question a few things, investigate. Don't be afraid to make some changes and see how you feel. One of the few things we can control these days in this modern world is what we put in our mouths. And I can tell you for a fact that, you know, those simple changes for me were life-changing on a grander scale. And they may be simple, but they change both of our lives and are changing yours, especially too, Michael. You know, and you look back, and I said to you earlier, we want to go back to our younger selves a few years ago. And I want to go back and go, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't you dare do it. I wish I knew what I know then. But as we mentioned earlier, we wouldn't be able to have gone on the journey we had and share the story we now can share, in the hopes that others don't fall victim to that same sort of traps that are out there. You know, when you really start to go down the rabbit holes on everything, it can really open up your eyes for sure. I hope that answered your question, or at least the best that I could.
It does. And then the next one I wanted to ask is, and I'll share a little part of mine. But I just, this past summer, I started noticing, I'm a pretty emotional guy and I'm very empathetic. But that said, this summer, I really started noticing just little tiny acts of kindness. You know, even somebody sending me an emoji about something. And I'm finding that I'm calling them pings of joy. And it's like things are getting deeper into my heart. And it's just got me really curious, just from even an observational place. Wow, it's like I feel like I'm getting touched in a deeper level, and I'm letting things in more. And I don't know if they were blocked off or just not processing right, but I'm noticing that. And I'm also noticing, well, let me just, and then on things on a spiritual level are also feel like they're getting inside me deeper. And I'm wondering if you've had any kind of experiences like that yourself.
Absolutely, I have. Absolutely. You know, the irony of this is that I went or became a vegan to to save the animals and be more in
Yeah.
touch with nature and the planet. But the irony is now I feel closer than ever to them, even though I'm using them as a source of nutrition. You know, as we all know, life is a circle. We are going to go to dust and come back. And I have, because of the mental clarity that I've found with this way of eating now, because I can tell you before, you've heard the story, I was anxious, depressed. I couldn't really think straight. I could not read a book during those times, which is why I found, thank God there are things like this podcast to listen to, because I couldn't focus long enough to take things in a page format. But the mental clarity, the hope, the happiness, the joy that comes along with this is incredible. And I agree with you. It's like I'm smiling again. I feel when I go outside and I'm listening to the birds and appreciating nature more and just being in a happier space, calmer, knowing that we are healing. And, you know, one thing I want to just remind the listeners of, and I say this often, is just remember when if you're on a journey that we didn't get sick overnight. So healing can take some time. So don't expect it to be overnight. This is a process that you go through. Michael's talked about it, the dumping, but it can and it will happen. And this gentleman I'm sitting across the screen from today, even though we're miles apart, is a testament to that. And God bless you, Michael. I really appreciate that you're in this space and sharing your story.
Yeah, well, thank you. You're so willing to join me on my podcast here, and it just feels like we're kind of brothers in arms here. I started calling us Oxalate brothers a while
Hey,
back when we were messaging each other, and I really feel that way. And it just feels good to be finding other souls on similar journeys, and our you know, part of our path is it's not only healing ourselves but also healing anyone else we can touch.
I agree. And
So
for those folks, before we wrap up, that any of those folks that want to find me, I
yep.
am at _carnivorist on Instagram, same handle on YouTube. And I have a Spotify channel where I take my lives and I put the audio up there of the success stories that I interview folks on. And Michael's going to be one for sure in the new year. He's been very patient with me as I've navigated work world and this exciting new world, which I hope to make more of my work at some point in the future. And we're going to have Michael on and get his story out there. So that's where you can find me online right now.
Awesome. Well, hey, it's been a total pleasure and honor to have you on today, James. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, sir.
yeah, and I look forward to our next meeting, however that might be. So thank you all for listening, and I'm going to sign off for today.